industry stakeholders and will help drive innovation in the cryptocurrency landscape. This process has taken multiple years, and a passable and agreed upon product is getting quite close. Negotiations are still taking place, and we have to continue to work collaboratively to get this signed into law. So those are all the details I can share with you about the negotiations today, but I can also tell you that I am very proud of this work, and I believe fully that stablecoins are a foundational regulatory step in unlocking the full potential of crypto assets like Bitcoin. I'm really excited about today's conference. I hope you guys have a robust dialogue and debate, and I look forward to our continued friendship and community. Thank you.
Thank you again, Senator. We really appreciate that, and we appreciate your leadership on these issues. I'm Stephen Pollack. I'm the Senior Vice President of Operations at Bitcoin Policy Institute. I'm going to be your MC this morning, and thank you again for the opening remarks. We're excited to get on to the content here. To kind of kick us off for our opening keynote, we have one of our Bitcoin Policy Institute fellows, Natalie Smolinski. Natalie Smolinski founded and leads the Texas Bitcoin Foundation, a public charity dedicated to original research and education about Bitcoin and political economy. Previously, Natalie co-founded Learning Machine, a SaaS company that built the first Bitcoin-based digital identity wallet and helped launch the decentralized identity movement. Natalie is also a political and economic anthropologist developing a theory of value. She writes about Bitcoin policy as a senior fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Join me in welcoming Natalie Smolinski.
Good morning. Today I want to talk to you about peer-to-peer and what that means. The best way to do that is to start small. Let's start from you and me choosing to do something together. It could be anything. Have a conversation, take a walk, share lunch, make a purchase, watch a movie, play a game, start a company. It doesn't matter. What matters is it's you and me together doing something we both want to do simply because we want to do it. You and me, peer to peer. Every great project, every great institution, every great discovery, every great company, every great country begins with a you and a me. There is no one we forgot to ask. There is no one who can give us permission. There is no ID required. There is no third party. There's just you and me. You and me, we, are the basis for what is called civil society. The network of countless yous and me's out there, just doing their own thing, sometimes growing into bigger we's. It is civil society that forms the backbone of the people who give their consent to be governed by any particular government. As the founding fathers of the United States reminded the world, that consent can be revoked. All power belongs to the people, not some of the power, some of the time, but all of the power, all of the time. The people may choose to temporarily delegate some of these powers to a government they consent to, but they can just as easily revoke that consent. The government has no inherent powers, no inherent rights, and certainly no inherent money. All of it comes from the people, and the people can take it back. By doing things peer-to-peer, you and me, just because we want to, we realize one day that, hey, we have power. Not because we made a plan to have it, not because we were trying to have it, not because someone gave it to us, but just because we used it. And this is where we arrive at our principle, that peer-to-peer is a human right. Communicating and transacting without a third party in the middle is not an anomaly, it's not suspicious, and it's certainly not a crime. It is the way that human beings have always done things from time immemorial. It's only because of the acceleration of information technologies today that we can even imagine governments, companies, and other third parties trying to get in the middle of every message and every penny that is sent between yous and me's around the world. The founding fathers themselves could not have imagined such a technological future, but they did articulate the principle of peer-to-peer in the Fourth Amendment. Quote, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized." Unquote. But something happened in the 1970s. The US Congress, the elected legislative representatives of the people, tried to outlaw the Fourth Amendment. Starting with the Bank Secrecy Act in 1970 and continuing through the Orwellian Right to Financial Privacy Act of 1978, Congress attempted to make it legal for banks and other third parties to search and seize without a warrant. The Supreme Court helped them with its 1976 ruling in United States v. Miller, which defined third-party doctrine legally, that people who willingly give information to a third party, like a bank or a phone company, have no reasonable expectation of privacy. Think about that. Imagine that. Imagine today living without a bank, a phone company, or an internet service provider. The Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that any person interacting with any of these entities at any time has forfeited their constitutional right to privacy. That is the opposite of what the founders of the United States believed. The US Post Office was founded in 1775 on the eve of the American Revolution, in large part to enable revolutionaries to securely communicate. This is because the British postal system was fully government surveilled. To this day, opening mail that is not addressed to you or preventing its delivery to the intended recipient is a federal crime in the United States. But in only one short decade during the 20th century, precisely as Silicon Valley was gearing up to birth the global software industry, two branches of the US federal government decided that these protections would not apply to the new information technology revolution. Where was the separation of powers here? Where was judicial review? Where were the checks and balances? Well, they were all there, all working together to grant the state more power. Different branches of the government colluding with each other, thinking they can get away with it. After all, who noticed? That's always the move. Apologists for these laws and rulings, and for the many dozens of other laws, rulings, and international treaties that have been made since, will say that they had to do this because of crime. Now, crime is a legal category. It is what the state says is prohibited. The Constitution puts limits on what the state is able to prohibit and the methods it may use to investigate and sanction violations of what is legally prohibited. Those limits on the power of the state are what create the possibility of freedom. Proponents of the surveillance state say that your Constitution had to be made into an origami hat because the people had too much freedom. Think about that. That is their genuine, actual point of view. Not only is such a proposition absurd on its face, but in a prior age would have been called treasonous. Let me make very clear the sociological reality that is the inevitable result of the kind of surveillance that these anti-crime warriors are working to bring about. A society with no crime would be a fully totalitarian society. A fully militarized homeland with total information awareness, black ops against the civilian population. A free people will occasionally commit crimes. It is the obligation of law enforcement to prosecute crimes, but only after they have been committed, and then only within the boundaries established by the Constitution. Having a Constitution Having any legally meaningful concept of inherent human rights means that some crimes will go unsolved and unpunished, certainly unprevented. And that is an acceptable, indeed desirable, price to pay for human freedom. This principle applies internationally as well as domestically. In an era of accelerating communication technologies, it should be crystal clear that it is impossible to restrict your enemy's freedom without also restricting your own. There is no way to ensure that only the good guys can speak or economically transact. Mostly because every good guy is a bad guy to someone, and every bad guy is a good guy to someone. So who will decide, and for how long? Today we have the great privilege of hearing from activists putting their lives on the line for freedom in some of the most hostile places on earth. Lyudmila Kozlovska, president of the Open Society Foundation, Anna Chekovich, financial director of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, Roger Wang, author and activist, Jorge Draceti, president of the Organization for Economic Inclusion, Fadia Selamin, adjunct senior fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and Roya Mahboub, founder of Citadel Software. But as we celebrate each of these people, it should be apparent that the only reason they can use peer-to-peer technologies for liberation is because their oppressors can use it as well. Any truly peer-to-peer technology is a technology for enemies. It is only by making it impossible to decide who is good enough to use the network that it can be an engine for freedom at all. We are living through an era of fashionable authoritarianism everywhere. Every government and most political parties across the ideological spectrum believe that they have not only the right but the obligation to police speech and economic activity for the greater good. But the only true greater good that there is or can be emerges from your good and my good as we go about freely pursuing happiness together. No one can tell us what that looks like. No one can predict what it will look like in the future. As our we gets bigger, our good can involve more people, but that happens bottom up, not top down. The joy and the struggle of being human is that we get to figure out who we are and actualize our own potential by doing things together in the world, by risking things, and by taking responsibility for the conditions and outcomes of what we choose to do. This is impossible in the fully owned safety internet that the crime preventers are building. It should go without saying that there is no guarantee of safety, either in a free or an unfree world. But in an unfree world, the exits have been cut off, and there are snipers watching your every move. Let's hope you built a sufficient peer-to-peer network, because it will become your underground railroad. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Natalie. Truly a gift to BPI. Excited to announce our first panel of the day, Resistance Money, a philosophical examination of Bitcoin. Leading the charge here is Andrew Bailey. Andrew is an interdisciplinary teacher and a scholar whose work spans philosophy, politics, and economics. He is Associate Professor of Humanities at Yale NUS College, Singapore, and 1/3 of the Resistance Money trio that'll be joining us this morning. Bradley Rettler is an Assistant Professor of Philosophy at the University of Wyoming, where he teaches classes on metaphysics, ethics, and Bitcoin. And finally, Craig Warmke is Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Northern Illinois University. He has published peer-reviewed articles about the nature and function of Bitcoin. As these three join us this morning, these are all three fellows of Bitcoin Policy Institute, and they are the co-authors of the academic book that is called Resistance Money, a philosophical case for Bitcoin. The book, published by Routledge, will be available later this summer. Join me in welcoming the Resistance Money trio, as I like to call them.
We are going to, going to pose some variation of this question to you 3 times during our presentation. So here's the first one. If you woke up tomorrow not knowing who you'd be in the world, how would you feel about Bitcoin? We are at the Bitcoin Policy Summit, not the Bitcoin Investing Conference, not the Bitcoin Academic Conference. We're not here to figure out whether we should buy Bitcoin or what Bitcoin's effects on the economy or finance might be. We're here to think through the question of what Bitcoin policy should look like. When we evaluate Bitcoin, we tend to do so self-interestedly. We think about what Bitcoin's role in our lives is or should be. We think about how Bitcoin affects us as individuals, and then we evaluate it on that basis. But that's not the goal of a summit like this. You can do that on your own. The reason that we're here today is to evaluate Bitcoin, not just for ourselves, but for our local communities, our states, our country, and the world. And the reason we've been asked to kick this off is because that's what our book does. Our book attempts to take a global neutral perspective about Bitcoin and try to evaluate it from that perspective, taking into account not just our own situations, but the situations of everyone in the world. This is also the Bitcoin Policy Summit, not the Cryptocurrency Policy Summit or the Blockchain Policy Summit. It's specifically focused on Bitcoin. I gave a talk at the University of Wyoming a couple weeks ago on Bitcoin as money for the marginalized, how Bitcoin helps marginalized people. And in the announcement of that talk, my provost said that I would be talking about how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can serve as resistance money, despite the fact that I did not mention other cryptocurrencies at all. And there's a reason for that. Even though Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are linked in our minds inextricably, there's a reason that we focus on Bitcoin in the book, and there's a reason that this summit is focused on Bitcoin. And that's because Bitcoin is special. Bitcoin is special for 3 reasons. The first reason is that Bitcoin has a unique founding story. The second reason is that Bitcoin has a unique design. And the third reason is that Bitcoin has a unique network. Any 2 of these reasons might not be enough to warrant this kind of attention to Bitcoin. But the 3 of them together, the founding and the design and the network, together combine in a way that makes Bitcoin worth having a policy summit like this about. And we're going to talk a bit more about each of these 3 aspects of Bitcoin in our panel.
It is hard enough to start a new money. It's like starting a new language. It's really hard to convince other people to speak that language, especially if you don't have the power of taxation. But this is what Bitcoin accomplished. And looking carefully at how this happened can show us 2 respects in which Bitcoin's founding is unique. First, there were no insiders at launch. And second, Bitcoin has launched beyond that into a state with outstanding leadership. Let's look at these in turn. Now, when you're launching a new money, one way you could do it is just to print a bunch of tokens for free and then give them to your friends or to yourself. Or perhaps you could sell them to others. And this is, in fact, how many current cryptocurrencies work. So here are charts for the top 3 non-Bitcoin cryptocurrencies right now. And you can see that at launch, they achieved that distribution of initial tokens through some combination of sales, printing tokens for free and giving them to insiders, printing tokens for free and giving them to a foundation, or to community partners. Now, when I look at data like this, here's what I see. I see insiders. And then I wonder, well, who got the proceeds from the sale? Insiders. And then I wonder, who runs the foundation? Insiders. And then I see who runs these community organizations. Again, it's the friends of the developers. It's more insiders. Now, this, in our view, is not a promising way to launch a new, fair, and neutral money for the world. Bitcoin, by contrast, distributed all of its initial tokens, and indeed every token ever since, in one and only one way, through competitive mining, a process that anyone can join, and that doesn't involve making money for free and then giving it or selling it to others. So Bitcoin's founding story is unique in this way. Here's why it matters. If you want money to be neutral, it's critical that there won't be insiders, those who can print money for free in ways that others cannot. And there's an ethical reason that we might care about this too, which is just for fairness, that it doesn't really sit well with us that a private money could be issued for free when some people can do that and others can't. So a competitive process that all may participate in, by contrast, is, and appears to be, far more fair to many. Finally, there's an important signal you send here. You could print tokens and then sell them to others for real money. The signal you're sending there, the revealed preference, is that you would rather have that real money than the token you just printed. Bitcoin doesn't work like this. Instead, you have to pay to make Bitcoin by using energy and mining it. This sends a signal from the very get-go that Bitcoin is valuable even to those who produce it. Bitcoin today has no standing leadership. There is no Bitcoin CEO. There's no trademark holder. There's no standing foundation, though people try to start it every once in a while. It always fails. There's no known leader. There's no figurehead. And here's why this matters. Bitcoin has reduced an important key man risk. It's not as though its founder could die and then we wonder about the future. The founder is gone. And this reduces a risk of manipulation. For example, rolling back transactions that didn't favor the leader or his friends. These risks are reduced in the case of Bitcoin. The result is that Bitcoin is something like a feral institution. Though it was once engineered, though it was once carefully crafted and run on just one computer, now it runs on many, and it roams free like the Mustang.
Bitcoin is special in design. As Andrew mentioned just a second ago, Bitcoin is a kind of feral institution. It roots out the authorities for the jobs that we normally entrust to entities like PayPal or Fedwire. With Bitcoin, there's no central clearinghouse where all transactions flow through. Instead, Bitcoin has it has many small clearinghouses that settle transactions. And these are miners, of course, and this is Bitcoin mining. So just a brief synopsis about what goes on when you submit a Bitcoin transaction to the network. If we transact with each other, we'll submit the transaction. Nodes on the network will then validate these transactions and put them through a battery of tests. And if they pass those tests, nodes propagate these transactions to the miners. Miners then bundle these transactions and compete with one another to try to publish their batch. And if a miner thinks it has a candidate, it'll propagate that block back to the nodes, and the nodes will run the block through a battery of tests. And if it passes those tests, then the nodes themselves append that block as the latest block in the blockchain. Okay, so miners compete to publish blocks of transaction. They do it because if they win, they receive a quantity of Bitcoin in the block that they produce. But they compete by buying a lot of lottery tickets. And so to win, you have to have a winning lottery ticket. Okay, more on these tickets. So in real life, if you have a lottery ticket, you don't know that it wins right when you buy it. You have to do something. You have to scratch it off. And it works similarly with Bitcoin. When miners run through these tickets, they don't know whether or not it's going to win beforehand, so they have to do something by trial and error. And what they do is they spit it into an equation. And then a ticket will win if it solves the equation. Now, just as all the construction workers I used to work with, Bitcoin miners want as many lottery tickets as possible to increase the probability of winning. And so miners will use energy. They're paying with energy for all these lottery tickets and rifling through them through the equation, through computation. And a winning ticket provides a digital fingerprint. It's verifiable, and it's called a hash. And each hash for a winning block goes in this subsequent block. Otherwise, nodes will reject the next block. As a result, Every block except for the first has a pointer to its predecessor. So these hashes have a dual purpose, and this speaks to the elegant engineering of Bitcoin. The first purpose is to order blocks, and the second is that these hashes serve as self-referencing measures for the amount of computation likely expended in the production of the block. By putting the ordering and the measurement system together, when a node connects to the network for the first time, a node can decide for itself which chain of blocks has the most accumulated proof of work. All right. So with proof of work, Bitcoin accomplishes three important tasks, three feats. Number one, consensus without authorities. Nodes don't have to ask each other, hey, what chain of blocks are you going to endorse? They don't negotiate, if you accept this block, I'll accept this one. Instead, they run the Bitcoin protocol and they follow a rule. Endorse the chain of blocks with the most accumulated proof of work, and they each decide for themselves and they decide in lockstep. So this is how we achieve consensus without authorities in Bitcoin. And similarly, every Bitcoin that's ever been issued has come from the block reward for the miner that produces the block. As Andrew mentioned earlier, this means that Bitcoin has issuance without insiders. So consensus without authorities, issuance without insiders, and we also get a neat churn in the top block producers. Because of Bitcoin's connection to real-world resources, the energy that's required, the machines that use that energy in computation, we see a churn. Those machines they have mass. They're physical things, and so they're subject to entropy. And the humans who run those machines also sometimes make mistakes. Sometimes the world just runs the wrong way against their decisions. So as a result, we do see a game of musical chairs in Bitcoin over time. So consensus without authorities, issuance without insiders, and then a churn in the most powerful miners. Okay? So because of this use of resources, many have asked, well, why not use proof of stake? It's less energy intensive, it's highly efficient, and Bitcoin's not going to move to proof of stake for a few different reasons. So just a bit about proof of stake first. You want block production in any blockchain to be costly. This is what prevents Sybil's and Sybil attacks. Bitcoin makes block production costly by mining. Proof of stake makes block production costly by requiring stakers to devote capital and lock it up into the network so they can't spend it in any other way. The features of proof of stake then lead to some centralization, at least in theory. So first, there's a rich get richer effect. This is because the rewards a staker receives are proportional to the amount that someone stakes. So we see in proof of stake networks a rich get richer effect because the more you stake, the more rewards you get, which you can then stake and get more rewards. There's also a wealth is power effect. The more you stake, the more control you have over which transactions are included in blocks, which transactions are excluded from blocks. And the rich get richer effect and the wealth is power effect combine so that the rich on the network become increasingly more powerful. There's also more staying power. Unlike Bitcoin miners, which are subject to entropy, proof of stake assets are like abstract substances. They don't have mass. They don't have energy. They're not subject to entropy. And so as a result, stakers enjoy a greater staying power. Okay? So combine these three effects together, you get the rich becoming increasingly powerful and they can more easily hang on to that power. And then one last thing about proof of stake networks, which is a kind of technical issue, it's that if you're joining the network for the first time, or if there are downtimes with the network and you need to reboot and figure out which version of the blockchain to accept, you have to accept some trust in the network. You have to pick a node that you trust. Okay, and this could be the node of a founder, it could be the node of a foundation, it could be the node of an influencer. This would be up to the particular staker. So as a result, Bitcoin is not going to endorse proof of stake anytime soon. These features centralize Bitcoin, and they trend toward the very kinds of systems that Bitcoin was designed to avoid. And so whether or not you compare Bitcoin in its design to fiat currencies like the dollar or cryptocurrencies like non-Bitcoin cryptocurrencies, especially proof-of-stake networks, you can categorize them like this. There's everything else, and then there's Bitcoin.
In addition to the founding and the design, Bitcoin's network is also unique. And it's unique for 4 reasons. The first is that it was first. Bitcoin was the original cryptocurrency. Satoshi Nakamoto invented blockchains as a way to solve the double spending problem, and that is what has spawned all these other blockchain-based cryptocurrencies ever since. The second is that it's the biggest, and it's the biggest in 2 different ways. One way is just by looking at market cap. Of all of the, depending on how you count, 2,000, 12,000, 25,000 cryptocurrencies there are, Bitcoin has half of the market cap of all cryptocurrencies. So more market cap than the other 24,999 combined. The other way in which Bitcoin is biggest is that it has the most number of people who own the particular token. And this isn't sort of meant to mean, oh, Bitcoin's really popular, we should care about it. It's that these network effects matter. Does anyone in the room speak Esperanto? A little bit, okay. Super cool language. But really the only time that you speak Esperanto is when you go to a conference with other people who speak Esperanto, and you talk about how cool it is. It's not very useful outside of these sort of small communities. The more that other people are participating in the community that you are, the more valuable it is to be a member of that community. The more someone is willing to take in exchange something that you have, the more valuable the thing that you have is, the more worth owning it is. And in that respect, Bitcoin far outshines any other cryptocurrency. The other way that Bitcoin's network is special is the way that it's actually used. And you'll hear a lot today about different use cases of Bitcoin. One of the most important is the letter sent by 21 human rights activists from 20 different countries to a variety of senators and other people who are involved in policy surrounding Bitcoin that's available at financialinclusion.tech. And they tell a number of stories of how Bitcoin is used in Hong Kong, Nigeria, Belarus, Ukraine, Cuba, Afghanistan, Venezuela. Bitcoin is actually being used in these places to resist authoritarianism or to resist rapid inflation. So when we're paying attention to an evaluation of Bitcoin, we need to look at how it's actually being used and the facts on the ground. Now, in addition to these practical points about what Bitcoin is actually doing, we can look at some theoretical points about the nature of the Bitcoin network independent of how it's actually being used, and we can see that Bitcoin is radically inclusive. There are no barriers in getting involved in Bitcoin. There are no barriers in acquiring Bitcoin. Anyone can mine, as we've discussed in the design, and anyone can acquire Bitcoin. There's no way to bar someone on the basis of race, age, nationality, creed, etc. And not only is this a theoretical point, but we can see it in practical ways as well. There are 2 measures of sort of distributions of cryptocurrencies that we can look at and see that Bitcoin outshines the rest. And those are the network distribution factor and the supply equity ratio. And these have to do with how much of Bitcoin is held, what percentage of all the Bitcoin there is held by the top 1%. And Bitcoin is the best along this dimension. And so for these 4 reasons, Bitcoin's network, combined with these other features, is something that makes it special.
Bitcoin's special, so it deserves special attention. It deserves special attention in research, because it's so different, in development, and especially in policy making. But when it comes to policy making, I think one thing you want to ask beforehand is, does Bitcoin overall benefit humanity? And here's the difficulty in having fruitful discussions among people who have so far disagreed about Bitcoin, and that's this reality check. People are biased. Bitcoiners are reputationally and financially long Bitcoin. We hold, some of us, very small amounts. We have staked our reputations on Bitcoin. So you'd expect us to be vulnerable to certain biases, and we admit that. And awareness of the biases that we might be vulnerable to often induces a rejection of measured treatments. Okay? But what's less often realized is that professional Bitcoin critics are also financially and reputationally short Bitcoin. They've often produced failed Bitcoin price predictions. They have lost opportunities, many times millions of dollars, by being wrong about Bitcoin. Does this not also induce biases? Of course it does. And you can see this in the kinds of attention that Bitcoin gets, not only among academics, who are, for the most part, critical of Bitcoin, highly so, but also amongst the media. When's the last time you saw a positive article in the New York Times about Bitcoin? Okay? And that filters through the press, through policymakers, into the rest of the world. But Bitcoin deserves careful treatment, so how do we get over the biases and awareness of biases that prevent careful dialogue? Okay? How can we discuss Bitcoin's net effect on humanity?
It's one thing to say, cast aside your biases. It's one thing to say, oh, let's be neutral this one time. Let's set aside our own identities. Let's set aside our own cares and desires and then see what this thing really is. It's one thing to say all that. It's quite another to do it. What would be helpful is a tool or some device that can actually spur our minds and turn our hearts towards a neutral evaluation of Bitcoin. We need something, some tool to help us do that. Now, we're philosophers. We're better at giving questions than answers. So as a tool to help us turn towards that neutral, evaluative stance of Bitcoin, we're going to offer you a question. This is our gift to you. The question is this: if you didn't know who you'd be, how would you feel about Bitcoin? And maybe to feel the force of this and to see how it can be a useful tool for evaluation and for stripping away our biases, just imagine that when you go to sleep tonight, you're going to wake up and you will be, or you might be, somebody else. In fact, when you wake up, you have an equal chance of being anybody. You could wake up to be a senator. You could wake up to be one of her staffers. You could wake up to be a Venezuelan farmer or a Russian dissident or a salaryman in Japan. You could wake up to be Professor Rettler. When you have that thought in mind, it can spur you to think differently about the world, because then you'll care about just how bad things might be for a huge chunk of the world's population that you might turn out to be upon waking. Not all of us will benefit from Bitcoin, and not all of us are harmed by Bitcoin. We receive Bitcoin's benefits or harms differently. But by thinking about the world in this way, which person could I turn out to be? We start to think about the least well-off, and we start to think about Bitcoin independent of our own particular dispositions towards it and the ways that it helps or harms each of us in particular. Now, for the philosophy nerds in the audience, this is not John Rawls' veil of ignorance. Instead, it's John Harsanyi's. And the difference is this: instead of abstracting away and ignoring all the facts about the world, we think it's helpful to keep the facts about the world in mind. The distribution of resources, the institutions that sometimes succeed and sometimes fail their subjects, the pockets of the world where liberal democracy has succeeded and those where it's languished. Keeping all of that into account and not stripping away or not abstracting it actually helps us more sharply clarify what Bitcoin benefits or harms. And it'll depend on who you might be when you wake up. So here's our gift to you. Not an answer, but a question. if you didn't know who you'd be, how would you feel about Bitcoin?
We wrote a book that starts with this question. After explaining Bitcoin, we explain this thought experiment, and then we go through different aspects of Bitcoin that are relevant to answering it. So we attempt to offer a comprehensive, measured, academic, neutral, global evaluation of Bitcoin from behind this veil of ignorance, where we don't know who in the world we might turn out to be the next day. We take into account Bitcoin's offerings with respect to financial privacy, how it allows you to purchase things outside of the knowledge of people who might use that knowledge to do you harm. We take into account Bitcoin's censorship resistance, how using Bitcoin you can buy things that perhaps your authoritarian government wouldn't want you to be able to buy. Perhaps gas masks to take to a protest or something like that. We discuss Bitcoin's financial inclusion, how Bitcoin can and is helping people who are unbanked and underbanked. And we talk about Bitcoin's monetary policy, how Bitcoin offers an alternative to central banks and their own monetary policies. Not that Bitcoin is better or that Bitcoin's going to take over, but that Bitcoin is different. It is a rules-based system rather than a ruler-based system. And it's good for people to have that as an alternative. Perhaps a lot of people won't need it as an alternative, but for the people that do need it, it provides an important lifeline. Especially in all of these cases for people who are on the margins of society. People who need to keep their financial data private. People who need to buy things that their government doesn't want them to buy. People who need access to digital cash that they don't get in other ways because of where they're located or how much money they have. And people who need escape from rapid or hyperinflation. We have done a lot of this work. And we offer it in the book as a starting point for you to think about your own evaluation of Bitcoin from this global neutral perspective. A lot of these things you may not find that you need. You may not care whether your financial transactions are private. You are happy for Visa or MasterCard to know about them. You may not need to buy anything that your local or state or national government disapproves of and doesn't allow you to purchase. You may have no problem getting access to digital payment systems, and you may be perfectly happy with your local currency and its rate of inflation and things like that. But you're not the only person in the world. Obviously, you know that. We as Americans are not the only people in the world. And our actions here affect what goes on in the rest of the world. Our legislation concerning Bitcoin affects how people in other countries can interact with Bitcoin. And we ought to care about them. We ought to maybe even prioritize their having this potential lifeline. So in the book, chapter 4, we ask this question. We set up the thought experiment. We suggest a number of lives that you could live or you could have lived. And we ask you to think about Bitcoin from that perspective. And the subtitle of the book, which Stephen mentioned, is A Philosophical Case for Bitcoin. So in the end, when we have gone through this exercise, we came out thinking that we would rather step back from behind the veil into a world that has Bitcoin rather than one that doesn't have Bitcoin. Perhaps you will come to different conclusions. And we're not going to tell you what to think. We're just going to suggest that this is a good way of thinking about it. You'll hear a lot today about various particular aspects of Bitcoin. You'll hear from Bitcoin miners about how Bitcoin interacts with the energy grid. They're probably not going to talk much about what's happening in Afghanistan. You're going to hear people talk about how Alexei Navalny used Bitcoin in his fight against authoritarianism in Russia. They're probably not going to talk much about Bitcoin mining in Texas. Those are irrelevant to those particular panels, but they're very much relevant to an overall evaluation of Bitcoin. And in the end, that's what we're here to do. We're here to evaluate Bitcoin along all of these dimensions. And so the question is not just, if I didn't know who I'd be in the world, how would I feel about Bitcoin mining in Texas? Or how would I feel about Bitcoin's use in the Ukraine? But rather, if I didn't know who I'd be in the world, how would I feel about Bitcoin overall? The book is going to be published in 2 months, but if you are interested in an advanced digital copy, especially if you are someone from the media or from policy, we're happy to send you copies. So come and find one of us and ask for it. But what we want to leave you with as you go through the rest of this summit is to, after each session, think about how it interacts with the other sessions. Synthesize all these things together and come up with an overall neutral global evaluation of Bitcoin.
Fantastic. Thank you guys again. That was incredible, and really excited about the book. So congrats again on Resistance Money. For our next group, we're going to kick off our fireside chats for today. Really excited about this. First of all, our host, David McIntosh. David is a leader for the principles of limited constitutional growth, government, and individual freedom. He is the president of the Club for Growth and leading advocate for economic liberty. Join me in welcoming David McIntosh. Our guest here is Representative Congressman Patrick McHenry. Patrick McHenry represents North Carolina's 10th district in his 10th term, covering parts of 9 counties. As chair of the House Financial Services Committee in the 118th Congress, he advocates for banking access and credit for families and small businesses. Previously, McHenry was the Republican leader and vice chairman of the Financial Services Committee, as well as the chief deputy whip, where he played a key role in passing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. He has also focused on supporting entrepreneurs, authoring the RAISE Act, and legislation for equity-based crowdfunding, both signed into law, earning him accolades in crowdfunding and financial innovation. McHenry has been an advocate for veterans, securing a health care clinic in his district, and has received numerous awards for his conservative leadership and support of small businesses, manufacturing, and taxpayer rights. Please join me in welcoming Representative Patrick McHenry. And they are on their way. That was a really good practice applause. So once we get him in here, we'll do that again. We do have a green room up the road. So one quick thing while we're waiting. We got a lot of people here standing on the sides, and we've done a pretty good job of getting everyone up at the balcony. Those of you who aren't aware, there is a lot of balcony seating. It looks like we still have some available to my left and quite a bit up here to the right as well. So if you're settled in, great, but if you're like, I just would like to get a bird's eye view of this situation, please go ahead and feel free to migrate on up. There's plenty of seats up there, and make some room for people who are kind of dropping in for a couple hours here and there. Also, there's coffee out in the lobby. We want to say thank you right now to Compass Coffee. These guys hosted a dinner for everyone last night. They brought coffee today. They're doing cold brew. They're doing espresso, everything. They have a full barista shop outside. So thank you again to Compass Coffee. They did all this complimentary, and they actually bring all their coffee in from El Salvador, and it's a really cool operation. So if you haven't been to any of their shops here in Washington, go check them out. And thank you again to Compass Coffee. We're still on a phone call, so we're gonna hold. This is part of the deal. Whenever we get the honor of hosting these elected officials, they're taking time out of their very busy schedule to come spend time with us today. And so thank you guys for your patience as we hold for a moment. We're gonna go ahead and go to break. Hey guys, feel free to take a 5-minute break. We will get started in 5 minutes. So be back and ready to rock. All right, everybody. All right, everybody. We're going to get back in and get started. Can you turn this up just a little bit? All right, we're going to go ahead and get everybody back in and get started. Our 5 minutes is up, so come back in, rejoin us, have a seat, and we're going to get back to the programming. Thank you guys so much. If everyone can hear me out in the hallway, go ahead and come back in. We will have another coffee break here within the hour. So go ahead and come back in and we'll get things going. Thank you guys.